Hey guys, Budcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, February 10th, 2022, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, in this video, I'd like to read to you an article from The Guardian in the UK that came out in October 2020 and has to do with this author, Hilary Mantel, and her quest to repatriate the skeletal remains of Charles Byrne, who lived during the 1700s and whose skeleton was on display in a British museum for almost 2 centuries. So she's trying to get the bones repatriated to Ireland, I guess, and this is, she's calling for that. And who knows if they'll listen to her or not, or anybody else concerned with it. But I thought we might read the article just to discuss it a little bit, because these are the type of things I'd like to discuss on my channel, because there is no explanation for people like Charles Byrne, and, as far as mainstream academia is concerned, and what they think about it. I mean, every single one of these large skeletal remains that are dug up, or people like this are considered as a person who lived during historical times, that have this gigantism and the other form of it in the later stages of life called acromegaly, but shouldn't be confused. They're not the same. But nobody ever considers that this might be vestigial, and that is because, in their eyes, mainstream academics' eyes, there's no such thing as giant races of human beings or humanoids living in the past. So, therefore, this anomaly has to be some sort of medical issue, and, couldn't be anything else. Although what they say about these things often contradicts what the actual research suggests. But we'll talk about it a little bit anyway. But I thought you might like to hear this article. Those in the UK might have caught it in 2020. But for those of us who haven't, let's hear about it. And what this fellow actually wanted for himself was just totally ignored. And, it's because of the fervor with these giant people and skeletal remains, and putting them on display in carnivals and sideshows and all kind of stuff. This was the rage around the world in Victorian times anyway, so but this actually took place well before Victorian times. But by the time of Victorian times, it was fully blown, and they were just digging skeletons up everywhere, putting them on display, and then for some reason, not many of them survived. Just sort of abandoned, got lost, thrown in the garbage, most likely, sold at garage sales, whatever. But the Smithsonian was noted for buying up a lot of these things, and why and where are they is what everybody wants to know. Even though it's reported by the reports of the Bureau of Ethnology, just there in black and white, and just a refusal to admit any of these real possibilities. Excuse me, I had to blow my nose. So, like I say, I believe that what they call these pituitary tumors are actually vestigial um, internal anatomy from the large humanoids, and they express themselves differently. There's a certain amount of levels of expression of these things, and they probably don't know why. And I can relate it to my daughter, and my daughter has a very rare genetic condition that comes out of left field. They don't know a lot about it. It's called Rett syndrome, RETT, quote unquote, Rett syndrome. Okay, they say it's genetic, although I found research from the University of Milan in Italy that they somehow a girl ended up with this condition, a young girl, after receiving the MMR vaccine. Okay, that's their research. It's on the U.S. government health website. Okay, so the thing is, with the condition that my daughter has, depending upon the where the aberration in the chromosomal chain occurs, dictates the level of functionality of these girls. It mostly only happens to girls. It's even rarer when it happens to boys, and the survivability rate is very low. And if they do survive, like my daughter, they often die prematurely. So what happens is, depending upon where the um, the discrepancy is in the chromosomal change, dictates their level of functionality. Well, some of these girls are very low functioning, almost like vegetables, and some are very high functioning. Well, my daughter is somewhere in the middle. So how these things express themselves, depending upon the defects in the chromosomal change, it that has some bearing on the level of functionality in people who have this condition. So in a similar way, especially with the incompatibility of the giant, quote unquote, giant or large humanoid DNA with our DNA, there's a certain level of compatibility, but there's going to be a certain level of incompatibility. And I think and I believe that they knew that in the past. And this is where some of the stories, the cannibal stories, come from. It's this kind of story you might tell your children to keep them away, because they knew that the results, among other reasons, of course, but they knew the result of crossbreeding because they could see it with their own eyes, okay, that it wasn't completely compatible. Whereas some of these people are very high functioning, like the Frisians, okay, which is something they can't explain. You have a whole entire um, group of people, right, of a certain size. Do they also all have gigantism? Is it genetic? Well, they talk about that in this. Apparently, they couldn't find the place in the skull where the pituitary gland is. They couldn't find any damage there to say it was defect, so they had to consider some other means to which the gigantism occurs. So let's read this article. It's not a long article, but I thought you might like to hear about it, and we'll talk about it too a little bit. So Hilary Mantel calls for the skeleton of Irish quote-unquote giant to be repatriated. Charles Byrne's remain acquired and displayed against wishes in UK for 2 centuries. So it's against his wishes to be on display like this, and he just totally ignored this guy. They couldn't care less, and it's just sort of the attitude they have to understand is, on a psychological level, the attitude of people who did these sort of things and people who would accept them despite what the wishes of this guy were. And, it all has something to do with the overall attitude about giant people, overall. So think about it in those terms. But in any case, the author Hilary Mantel has called for the Royal College of Surgeons to repatriate the skeleton of an Irish quote-unquote giant whose bones remain in storage in London 2 centuries after he asked to be buried at sea. Charles Byrne had a genetic form of gigantism that caused him to grow to more than 2.31 meters, 7 foot 6 inches tall. Okay, so a genetic form of gigantism. Okay, so they examined the skull, they looked for the damage where the pituitary gland is, and they didn't find it. Okay, so there obviously must be some other reason for it that must be genetic. Unfortunately, to prove a genetic reason or source that causes gigantism is extremely difficult in their own words. Okay, so to categorize this as a genetic form without having a full and complete understanding of the genetic, mechanics that give rise to this, they just throwing it to the wind and just saying anything because they can't explain it. Okay, it would have been easy to explain it if they found some sort of damage near the pituitary gland, but they didn't. So now it's got to be something else. Okay, and I'm just looking at this skeleton of this fellow in this picture with the queen looking at it. This was in the Hunterian Museum in London in 1962. Okay, she's looking at this guy. Okay, so it doesn't appear to me, judging by his bones here and everything, that he appeared to be very frail. Look at the size of his vertebrae for the skeleton. It's just immense, okay? And when I look at a guy like this, when I look at a skeleton like this, it always makes me think of somebody like Shaquille O'Neal, okay? So here's a picture of Shaquille O'Neal next to another basketball player, okay? You can see the shape of this fellow's head. And this guy's a rather tall guy, too, but look at Shaq, okay? I'm looking at this photograph of Shaq here, and I'm saying to myself, "Guy, this how looks so much like an Adina or a Bell Beaker skull type. It's certainly different, you see, than this fellow right here. This is more like everybody I know, all right? But Shaq's skeletal anatomy is different, especially his skull. Looks like an Adina or a Bell Beaker to me." All right, he probably does have the DNA remnants of the Bell Beaker or the Adina in him somewhere, or people similar to that were on this planet some thousands of years ago. Okay, and I know in my last video, a lot of people got upset. I hate to tell you, the facts bear out everything I say about it, and I've read to you from here on this channel about all these legends and myths of the giants coming from people like the Algonquins and the people in Europe about, and the mainstream, archaeology and anthropology done on about how the Bell Beaker brought metallurgy and farming into these areas, agriculture, et cetera, pottery making, all this stuff. Well, what were the regular human beings doing in these areas before these people got there? I mean, besides picking their nose and picking their toes or whatever it is, evidently the giant humanoid peoples all around the world brought all these things to humanity. And, this is the legacy that they're trying to bury, I think. Okay. And what stories do we have about the cannibalistic giants? Okay, so we have the Bible, we have the Lovelock people, a few odd and stories from Europe, along with ones about the good giants, and also in the Americas too, like with the Algonquin people, some hostile stories from the Iroquois with the stone giants. But other than that, what are we talking about? A handful of stories about them being cannibals, and a whole lot more about them bringing all these gifts with them. Okay, so this is probably what's trying to be buried. Okay, with the reset, the historical reset, and everything else. They can't let us know these things because the past is far different than we can imagine, and they don't want us to know about it. Okay, we want to take the legacy of all the types of engineering and all the agriculture and everything on ourselves, but it doesn't belong to us apparently. Okay, while we were picking our noses and picking our toeses. Okay, when the Bell Beaker people came and the Adina and everything and brought all these things with them: metallurgy, agriculture, engineering, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, I'm sorry about it. You feel bad about it, and it's not us. And they just gave us the ball. We ran with it, and we're not the originators of it. Well, look, it's just part of the past. What are you going to deny it? You're not going to include any of these stories. It's just one-sided argument here about the cannibalistic giants and all these other stories about good giants and then passing all kinds of things to us. Are you just going to bury that because that makes for good storytelling? I mean, come on. You're going to ignore the truth because, you have feelings about it. You steady brainwashing that you've been receiving for years and years and years about the giants. Feel sorry for you, man. I really do. The author Hilary Mantel has called for the Royal College of Surgeons to repatriate the skeleton of an Irish giant, quote unquote, whose bones remain in storage 1 to 2 centuries after he asked to be buried at sea. Charles Byrne had a genetic form of gigantism that caused him to grow more than 2.31 meters, 7 foot 6 inches tall. His height made him a celebrity in 18th century London, and while he was still alive, he went to great lengths to try to ensure his skeleton was not put on display after his death, a fate then usually reserved for executed criminals. But despite his wishes and his plans for a sea burial after Byrne's death in 1783, his remains were acquired by the pioneering Scottish surgeon and anatomist John Hunter, possibly after he bribed an undertaker to switch corpses. Byrne's skeleton appeared in Hunter's private collection 40 years later and stayed on public display for much of the subsequent 2 centuries at the Hunterian Museum run by the Royal College of Surgeons. In 2018, the museum said it would consider Byrne's fate during renovations, suggesting they could reconsider the matter. But the museum's reopening has been pushed back to 2022 or later, and further protests have arisen. It's time Charles went home, Mantel said in an email to The Guardian. The Booker-winning Wolf Hall writer is the author of a fictionalized portrait of Byrne entitled The Giant O'Brien. She added, I know that in real life he was a suffering soul, nothing like the fabulous storybook giant I created, and that his gratifications were fewer and his end very grim. I think that science has learned all it can from the bones, and the honorable thing now is lay him to rest. It would suit the spirit of the times. I don't see a reason for delay. He's waited long enough. I assumed the burial at sea was just an attempt to evade Hunter, and that if the bones were recovered from the RCS, he would be buried in Ireland. I hope there would be a welcome party for him, and I hope I can come and join it. Byrne was born in 1761 in a rural area of County Derry called Littlebridge between Cookstown and the western shore of Lough Neagh. He left home to make his fortune and traveled through Scotland and the north of England as a quote unquote curiosity act before settling in London, where he traded on his celebrity. Okay, so I'm wondering if it's near this cluster of gigantism that they, so-called cluster of gigantism they found in North Ireland there with all these tall people up there and attribute to some person in the past, whatever. It's just a bunch of nonsense, okay, because they can't look at it any other way, okay? It's got to be some medical condition. It can't be any vestigial remnants of some past races of large humanoids, even though they know all about the Bell Beaker people that were in those areas. Even though they know all about them, they know that there were people in the past that were ultra tall for some reason that they can't explain, okay? But in no way could these people that are giant size that they can't explain have anything to do with it. It's got to be some medical condition. Okay, does that make any sense to anybody? You have evidence of races of large humanoids existing in the past. Not to say that there wasn't any more than that. That's the only ones that they found. They haven't dug up every square inch of the planet. Okay, what about ones that they haven't found? They have to figure. It's just the law of average dictates that there's more out there that they haven't discovered. Okay, well, what about that? Right? This obstinacy here has everything to do with Darwinianism and the way past is seen in a sort of linear form here, from the primitive to more advanced, and nothing else ever happened in the past, and the human race only goes back so far. We were cavemen at such and such a time, and before that, no, and we weren't even around 200,000, we came out of nowhere 200,000 years ago. There's a missing link there and everything, all this stuff they can't explain, but you're going to close off any possibility of these other things, okay, based on what they know already, like about the Bell Beaker people and the Adena people. Where does that come from? You can't explain it. So, why not consider all these other possibilities? But they can't, okay? They're told not to. Again, they're taught what to think, not how to think. His success led him to moving to Charing Cross and inspiring a pantomime called the Giant's Causeway. However, as Byrne's health began to deteriorate, he began drinking heavily and died age 22. Now, did he die from the drinking? Or did he die from the health problems from gigantism? Nothing, it's not said here. Okay, of course you can drink yourself to death too. Many people have in the past. Many actors, for instance, okay, drank themselves to death. And when your health deteriorates to such a point, well, you just can't drink all the time. You got to rest and eat good and all this kind of other stuff. But you're making money and you like getting drunk. Well, somebody age 22 has no governor on. Okay, so, but needless to say, the people often that they call suffering from gigantism expire prematurely. All right, but we've read in other articles about how these people from gigantism live like to over 100 years old, according to them. Okay, so make up your mind. Either they expire prematurely, they live a long time. I mean, come on. Again, they're all different levels of the expression, the vestigial expression of the DNA from the giant humanoids, okay? From the fullest it can be to somewhere in between where all these problems seem to come with the expression of the genes, okay? Hunter had offered Byrne a financial settlement in return for his body when he died. Byrne declined, but was so afraid of ending up as an exhibit, he arranged with his friends for a sea burial. Although his body got as far as Margate, somewhere between there and the sea, it ended up in Hunter's possession. Dr. Kathleen Liddell, the director of the Center for Law, Medicine, and Life Sciences at the University of Cambridge, said the museum would benefit from changing tack. Personally, I think it would be suitable to have Charles Byrne's bones buried and replaced by a life-size image of them, she said. There is no evidence that he dissented from having images displayed. The museum could use this change to highlight the ethical, historical, and legal issues. Currently, unfortunately, it's the debate that is buried. The museum needs to engage with the public about this. They've had a long time to think about it. Byrne's DNA has already been extracted, sequenced, and used in medical research. This is still something Byrne objected to, said Dr. Cleona McGovern, the head of forensic and legal medicine at University College Dublin. We know Byrne did not consent to his body being on display, and most unusually for a case from 1783. We know what his explicit wishes were: burial at sea. Hunter interfered with the burial, which was and is a legal right, and he also made no reference to any of Byrne's family, who also had a legal right over Byrne's estate. At the time, the use of bodily remains for display or anatomy was reserved for traitors and murderers. Byrne was determined that such humiliation was not for him, McGovern added. Newspaper accounts of the time reported that he wanted to be weighted down and buried at sea. He was not a criminal, and he did not want his body to be disinterred by body snatchers. Francie Malloy, the MP for Mid-Ulster, where Byrne was born, has called on the museum to respect Byrne's wishes. Alternatively, he said, we would be more than happy to welcome home the remains and have them rest in his native area. A spokesman for the Hunterian Museum said it would not be reopening for at least another 2 years. An update on plans for all the displays in the museum will be issued in due course. So that's the end of the article, but it's interesting that they say this Burns fellow had a genetic form of gigantism, which is very difficult to prove. Okay, so you see it right here. Finding a specific genetic cause for gigantism has proven to be difficult. Gigantism is the primary example of growth hormone hypersecretion disorders, a group of illnesses that are not yet deeply understood. They're not yet deeply understood. You get that, right? So all these claims of gigantism is speculation upon speculation upon speculation upon speculation. You understand that, right? Okay. And what I'm saying to you seems to be more credible based on the fact that we already know that gigantic humanoids existed in the past in these areas. And how many more could there be based on the law of averages and statistics? Okay. That there probably were more that they haven't as yet identified in all areas around the planet. Okay, like we find the elongated skulls everywhere on the planet. We find the gigantic humanoids all over the planet in a past that looks more like Tolkien's version of it than anything, and most likely was the actual past that they have to keep from us. And they also have to keep from us the fact that the giant humanoids brought to us many things that we are indebted to them for bringing to us. Okay, that's not something they want to reveal to us. Okay, we want to take credit for it, just like all the leaders in the past who decide to revise history in order to make cause such nationalism that people can forego any use of their brain to figure anything out, right? Just USA, USA, whatever it is. It's just people are fanatics. Okay, Karl Popper, the longshoreman philosopher, wrote a book on it. If you care to read it, okay, The True Believer, okay, about people who are just normal people who can be incited to commit all sorts of atrocities against other people, okay, like the the peaceful Paiute people against the Wabanaki people, like the peaceful Pueblos against the people of Galena Canyon, okay, and the people in Bright Winter Cave and all kind of stuff. All right, because in certain areas of the planet, our species, regular Homo sapiens, realized that we couldn't coexist with these people for a variety of reasons, which may or may not have been true, but you got to you got to take your lumps. You got to own up to whatever it is that you did, whatever you're responsible for or not responsible for, and own up to it, okay, in order to grow as a race, as a human being, etc., etc. If you're stuck with these old ideas, which are all the ones presented on the alternative research, whether they be about giants, whether they be about UFOs, whether they be about nutrition, and whether they be about the stone walls of New England or any other stone constructions in the Americas or whatever it is all a bunch of fucking nonsense. All right? I'm reading to you right here about the genetic reasons for gigantism. They don't understand anything yet. Not yet deeply understood. Okay, so they have a superficial understanding of it, yet they can feel free to categorize all these people with gigantism and they don't even understand it. Okay, and they give you lengthy explanations that come right out of their ass, right out of their fucking ass. Okay, and you're sitting there listening and going, okay, well, they got a lab coat on and a nameplate and a pocket protector. Oh, they must be right. Come on, guys. All right, stop with the bullshit already. Okay. You want to go listen to the History Channel and the bullshit on there, okay? I'm going to say, well, Jimmy Arrow was on it. Yeah, they put him on there to humiliate him. You understand that, right? Okay, so look, get with the fucking program already. All right. Don't take it so personally or whatever. Okay. You've been lied to about the past. You've been lied to about the giants since the Bible. Okay. They gotta lie to us. Okay. Or at least they feel they must because we can't handle the truth. Right? That's why, right? You heard that before, right? Jack Nicholson, right? Right. What do you think that's said for there? Nothing? All right, so it's the same thing that has happened again and again and again through the entire past. As our history is so muddled up, you can't make heads or tails out of it. You have to be a forensic scientist to try to figure out what the heck it was that went on in the past to create all these things. Okay? And as near as I can tell, we know so little about it. We're only just starting to discover what it is now. All right? So we need a little bit of time to put it all together. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to do my supposing. I'm not going to just, show you stuff and leave the analysis up to whoever, you know. I like to get feedback, but nobody ever gives me feedback. Okay, it just seems to be running off, back to the cannibalistic giants and UFOs or spaceships, and the walls were built by colonists and settlers, and you just eat this crap that we eat and everything, and everybody's nice and healthy and the best they could possibly ever be, and it's just all bullshit. Okay, clearly people are sick because they're not eating right, and nutrition has everything to do with health. There was sick society, according to the Pentagon chiefs, were too fat to fight. Okay? So, I don't think any of these giants in the past, like Shaquille ONeal, are too fat to fight. This guy rip your head off. Okay? He's a giant. Okay? He's one of the giants that's still living today. All right? It's the expression of their DNA right in Shaquille O'Neal. Okay? Looks like an Adina, like a Bell Beaker. Clear as freaking day. All right? The Giants didn't die out completely, okay? They're still around with us today. There was a small transition. It's just a recent past, okay? So, anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that little article there. I thought you might like to hear about it and discuss more about the Giants here, okay? And what's really going on, okay, with people who supposedly suffer from acromegaly and gigantism and everything. They're not explaining it right because they don't understand a lot about it, right? I just read you that, all right? All right, guys. Anyway, please do hit the like button if you like the video. And if you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe so you can hear some different ideas. Also, your alternative is to go to the rest of the channels on YouTube and elsewhere and whatever and hear the same shit over and over and over again. Same hackneyed crap over and over and over and over. No explanations, no nothing. Makes for great stories, but that's all they are. Or stories. Nothing has to do with the truth at all. All right? Like what the Giants gave to us. A lot. A lot. You have to thank them for a lot. All right? I know it makes you want to cry. There's Kleenex around, I'm sure. Okay? But take it easy, all right? We're trying to figure this thing out. Right? This is one of the ways of doing it. Or you can remain stupid and, obtuse and, in some sort of mental fog. Go back to those other channels and listen about the cannibals and spaceships and all kind of other crap. All right? All right, guys. Anyway, Bugcat7, I'm signing out. Peace.